Okay, this is part 3 of our Illuminati lecture series. Okay, so why do we know about an 18th century nerd club for atheists? In the contemporary age, the first people that we want to credit for our awareness of this group are Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea. These two men worked as associate editors for Playboy magazine. And part of their job was to curate the letters to the editor of Playboy from the general public, right? So this is the letters to the editor section. And after reading the rantings of political conspiracy theorists who, for some reason, think Playboy is the best place to get out their ideas, they decided to write a novel in which, quoting Wilson, all these nuts are right and every single conspiracy they complain about really exists. Together, they produced the Illuminatus trilogy. It consists of 3 books, The Eye in the Pyramid, The Golden Apple, and Leviathan. It is the winner of the Prometheus Hall of Fame for science fiction. The book is extremely difficult to read, as it is overly complicated and written almost like a competition between the two authors. I've tried, I could not get through it. I could get as far as The Golden Apple, and then I have to give up. Because it bends backward and forward in time, it takes place in dreams and alternate realities, and in some cases the characters are aware that they are in a book, right? And this could be an effective narrative. The Deadpool movie showed us this. This can work, but in this book it does not work. And the reason is because they're writing it as a joke, right? The book is intended to be a satire of the culture of the 60s and 70s. And even then, it's not a serious satire. The conspiracy theories alluded to in the book are the writings of people who feel like Playboy is the best way to get out their ideas. At one point, they recreate the JFK assassination with 6 or 7 different shooters, all doing so for different reasons. It's a crazy town book. But it's entertaining if you like just the interrupted, non-cohesive narrative. The book became a hit with the counterculture movement, and for anyone watching a fictional citing a super conspiracy, its inspiration comes from this trilogy. So the theory kind of exists for a bit, but it doesn't gain any traction until the 1990s. The 90s are notable for really terrible music, kind of bad fashion, really good movies, and the dawn of the internet age. And I'm kind of torn about whether or not this was a good or bad thing. Because on the one hand, I no longer had to go to the library to look things up, but on the other hand, neither did anybody else. The 1990s also gave us a phrase. On September 11, 1991, in a speech by President George H.W. Bush discussing the end of the Cold War, he called for a new world order. Now, the phrase had existed before that, it's just 3 words put together, but a conspiracy theorist latched onto the fact that the president had claimed it was time for a one-world government, although Bush did not, in fact, make this claim. He was discussing that it was time for a world in which the 2 powers of the Russian government and the United States government worked together rather than as enemies. This has not worked out historically, but whatever. Also, in 1991, Milton William Bill Cooper publishes a book, Behold a Pale Horse. This is an omni-conspiracist Bible of sorts. It lays out the template for every modern conspiracy theory which seeks to evoke the Illuminati. It's a crazy book, I'll give it that. It's got everything in it. It's got aliens and advanced weapons, which it would be a poor science fiction book if it weren't written as nonfiction. The book is was super popular with the 90s militia movement, and incidentally, among imprisoned African Americans. This is one of the biggest books for the prison system. It is referenced in songs by Tupac Shakur, Public Enemy, Old Dirty Bastard, and Jay-Z. Right? So these are not 2 groups which you would think would come together as far as what their textbooks were. The book talks of a coming one-world government run by the Illuminati. And Cooper is emblematic of the sovereign citizen militia movements that we see currently. Right, the sovereign citizens are the people that think they can get out of paying taxes due to a certain magic ordering of words. He had a radio show called The Hour of the Time, which was a proto-Alex Jones type show where Cooper would spout his theories, report on news gathered from his own intelligence group, and issue call to actions. He believed strongly in the Constitution, hated racism, and thought that we all should work together to protect our freedoms. This is him. If I'm sounding sympathetic, I don't mean to be. The only thing I will say about Cooper is that he had a pretty big tour in Vietnam, and his worldview and his sort of behavior may be explained by PTSD, by untreated PTSD. Um, he hated Alex Jones when Alex Jones was just starting up in the late 90s, and publicly denounced him as he was gaining in popularity, because Alex Jones kept trying to get on his show and interrupt, and Cooper was just like, no, I hate this guy. This guy's not a true believer. He's a shill. Jones has since adopted Cooper's mantle as being like, I'm the new Milton Cooper. It's like, no, man, he didn't like you at all. So the 1990s militia movement adopts his book, as well as a few others, including the notably racist Turner Diaries, and proclaims that the coming war in which the Illuminati, through its UN puppet, will conquer the United States. Yes, this is absurd, especially to anybody who paid attention to the news in the 1990s and realized that the UN really couldn't do anything. You look at Sarajevo, they were not able to stop anything from happening over there, but apparently they're also powerful enough to conquer the United States. So this belief is so endemic that Congress cannot get anything passed that agrees with the UN without having to fight a backlash concerning the loss of American sovereignty. For instance, the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Disabled was modeled after the U.S. Americans with Disabilities Act. When the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Disabled came before Congress for ratification, in other words, we were just be like, yay, disabled people are people too, Congress had to deny it because of the threat of the loss of American sovereignty, which again was about a non-binding resolution modeled after one of our laws. The general public pretty much ignored Cooper, if they were even aware of who he was. He was shot and killed by Apache County sheriffs on November 5, 2001, when they tried to execute an arrest warrant for unpaid taxes. Cooper had previously vowed that he would not be taken alive. The 1990s also gave us the X-Files. I was a fan back then, and I was also a conspiracy theorist, but I loved the X-Files. Up until the movie, the show is really solid until it gets a little weird. And then there's the final seasons where it's just like the writers are trying to save themselves. And then I don't really acknowledge those last two seasons as being real things. The problem the X-Files created was that it mainstreamed conspiracy theories in a way that hadn't been done before. We could also throw Oliver Stone's JFK into this as well. The show, being a massive hit, brought a secret society, which they called Majestic, as a conspiracy theory to people who have otherwise had no business even thinking about it. It never would have entered their thoughts, but now all of a sudden Majestic is a thing that they watch every Sunday. And this conspiracy theory, this conspiratorial worldview is something that they pay attention to. David Duchovny was a reasonably attractive man. He was the conspiracy theorist in the show, if you haven't seen it, and who didn't act like a stereotypical conspiracy theorist. He wasn't a crazy person. He was a person who acted a little odd sometimes, but that's because he had the truth and was fighting against a society that didn't want that truth to be known. It made conspiracy theorists likable rogues rather than the fringe lunatics that they were stereotyped as beforehand. And the problematic nature of the show was also reflected in its good writing, because the writers took conspiracy theories like Cooper's complex, confusing, and contradictory worldview, and they would iron them out and repeat them for the masses. Then the conspiracy theorists would take that free labor from those paid writers on the X-Files and repeat the better theory, which is now more plausible because the writers had to fit it into a narrative. Until season 8, which again is when the writers were just doing whatever they could and seeing what worked. So in a way, they kind of mirrored their source material a little too well. All right, we're going to stop there, and we'll get into the political implications of the Illuminati conspiracy theory with David Icke next. So thank you for listening.